Hey guys, welcome back to Nat 1 Videos. Today we are going to be dipping our toes back into the world of Skyrim. When it comes to visual aids for building miniatures and terrain, for my personal taste, Skyrim offers some of the most epic scenes to gain inspiration from. Back in October last year, I did a project where I used glass and flickering tea lights to make the forge from riverwood, and I've been wanting to take that technique and build it into a bigger, more epic build. And as far as blacksmiths go, you can't get more epic than the Skyforge. The forge is situated in the town of Whiterun and is run by the blacksmith Yorland Greymane, who is renowned for being the best blacksmith in all of Skyrim, although I've seen quite a few chat groups and forums where this is a bit disputed. All that aside, one thing is for sure, the Skyforge is an epic location in Skyrim and it is going to make for a seriously cool build. Obviously, the main feature in this build is going to be the great eagle that sits over the forge, but there are so many great little details in this scene and I'm going to do my best to try and incorporate all of them. At some point, I may take today's build to another level and include the underforge that you discover when you're doing the Silver Hand quest, but for this video, we're just focusing on the external terrain and the forge itself. Anyway, for a bit of fun today, throughout this video, I'm going to be dropping a few little Skyrim trivia questions. So if you think you know the answers, let me know in the comments below, and I will be giving a shout out to anyone who answers all 3 questions correctly in my next video. And to start off, the first question is, in which city do you find the headquarters for the Thieves Guild in Skyrim? Okay, let's move on. Right, time to tidy up the mess, and let's get started. So this project has probably taken the most thought and planning out of all of the builds I have done on the channel to date. I could have approached this build in several different ways, and I was even considering sculpting it from clay before I started, but it was probably best to stick to my strengths, so I decided to attempt carving it from XPS foam. Rather than straight carving it from a block of XPS with my carving knife, I decided to first of all rough out the shape using my proxon hot wire foam cutter. It would be totally possible to carve this all by hand, but this was just a way for me to save quite a lot of time that I could then focus into other areas of the build. Once I had the rough shape of the eagle's body, I then carved away any excess foam with my wood carving knife. This was actually my second attempt at doing this because in my first attempt I did a few cuts too many, so it's quite easy to overcarve by accident. I then used a ballpoint pen to draw in some of the details and carved away the unwanted foam. And for the feather-like texture, I used the ballpoint pen. A handy thing about XPS foam is that it takes texturing really well, so this technique is really good for a quick and easy effect. For the wings I did exactly the same process as the body, carving the rough shape out with a proxon, but I used one piece of XPS foam and then I drew the wing shape on, which I then cut in half, and this just made sure that both wings were symmetrical. When it comes to carving XPS foam, I find that the best tool to use is a wood carving knife. I have tried with X-Acto blades and Stanley knives, and although they are really sharp, I often find them a little awkward to work with. This little knife is really comfortable in the hand, and its shape means you can hold it easily in a number of different positions for carving. It has a nice solid blade and it's super sharp, so if you're interested in getting one, I've left a link in the description below this video. To attach the wings to the eagle, I would normally recommend pinning them with some cut-off toothpicks and using PVA glue or wood glue, but for the sake of time I decided to use hot glue. Now my glue gun runs hot, so I did melt the XPS foam ever so slightly, but not enough that it will be noticed in the final piece. So yeah, if you have time, I recommend PVA or wood glue for this step. For the forge that sits beneath the eagle, I used some scraps of XPS foam that I had left over from another build. I used the ballpoint pen to draw around the base of the eagle, and I drew the shape of the forge, constantly referring to my reference images from Skyrim to make sure that the shape and scale was correct. Again, I just glued these together with hot glue and cut the shape with a proxon, but all of these cuts are completely possible with a knife. It's just that a proxon kind of makes the job a little bit faster. Before gluing the eagle to the forge, there were just a few details that I had forgotten to add that I drew into the foam with my pen, and I then cut out the forge with my carving knife, because doing this when the eagle was glued would have been very awkward indeed. Then I just glued the bird into place, and just like that, it is starting to look a little bit like the Skyforge. So there are a few steps here that are very similar to the processes that I've already talked about in this video, so I'm going to use this as an opportunity to ask my second question in my little Skyrim trivia quiz. And the question is, what curse is the inner circle of the Champions Guild afflicted with? These questions are probably far too easy, but I wanted to make them achievable for the casual Skyrim gamers too. I probably should mention, if you are playing along with the quiz, please put all 3 answers into one comment. It will just make things a little easier when it comes to reading the comments later. Also, if you're not taking part in the quiz, feel free to just leave a comment about anything to do with the build. As I'm sure you've heard many YouTubers say, comments really help the video to gain more traction, and that really helps me out. Right, back to the build. You can see that I had forgotten to add this little step that sits at the front of the forge. No problem, easy fix. And also you can see how using the pen is a great way to draw individual bricks to give that cobblestone-like effect. With my eagle and forge built, it was time to move on and create the surrounding terrain. This is an outdoor setting, so it incorporates elements of man-made structures set in amongst natural rocks and stone. For the base, I used a nice thick piece of XPS foam that was going to be deep enough for me to hide some flickering tea lights inside. Just like the Riverwood forge that I made, I wanted to use the effect of shining light up through the base to make it look like the embers in the forge were red hot and glowing. I had considered using individual LEDs and wiring and soldering it all together, but sometimes the most obvious and simple solution is the best solution. Walter Chrysler, who is famous for starting the Chrysler car company, is quoted to have said, "Whenever there is a hard job to be done, assign it to a lazy man and he is sure to find an easy way of doing it." Now, I'm not saying I'm lazy, but yeah, there is nothing wrong with finding a few shortcuts when it comes to crafting. I had to turn the lights out here just to see the effect, and yeah, this is starting to look really cool. Happy with how the main structure of the forge was looking, it was time to move on to texturing, and our old friend the tinfoil ball came in really handy as usual. So there were a few awkward details that I couldn't carve out with my knife because I didn't want to risk breaking the foam ring around the forge. So instead I heated up a piece of wire and was able to use it to melt in those details at the back of the forge. I then made a little mistake and jumped too far ahead in the process by painting the eagle. You will notice that I ended up painting it all again at a later stage in the build, but no biggie. Okay, time to move on to some finer details in the project, starting with the wooden contraption that controls the bellows in the base of the forge. Now there is probably a better way of making this thing, maybe sculpting it with green stuff or something like that, but I was using what I had to hand. I melted a hole through a rod of XPS foam and threaded a bamboo skewer through the middle to give it strength. I then used a fine grit sandpaper to round off the sharp edges and corners and checked that it was going to be the right fit for the forge. And for sticking it together, I melted a little slot for the crossbar to slot into and glued it into place with hot glue. Okay, onto a very cool little detail of the build. I was sent this collection of little beads and trinkets by my friend Tina, and these little circular rivet things were going to be perfect for the wheels in the bellows contraption. I just used a dab of hot glue to stick two of these together and bingo, you have a wheel. I then pieced the whole contraption together using various bits of bamboo, glue, drilling and bodging. And in the end, I have this very cool little bellows contraption and it fits perfectly into the project. For the rope, I just used a piece of string that I poked through the base of the forge. I then wrapped it around the wheels after using a dab of PVA glue to make sure it stayed in place. And for the handle, I used another of the shiny beads. I quickly painted up the contraption with the usual base coat of black Mod Podge, and I did an overbrushing of burnt umber, and I will do some more dry brushing later on in the process. Right, finally on to making the coal bed for the light to shine up through. For this, I just used a piece of plastic from some food packaging. This stuff is perfect for crafting materials, so I always have a few spare cartons lying around the place. I stuck it on the back of the forge and drew an outline with a permanent marker and cut it out so that it was a perfect fit. I used some broken toothpicks to make some little posts to act as supports and then glued the plastic into place from the back using hot glue. Now, the hot glue does melt the plastic, so I did this in little sections at a time so as to not just melt it badly with too much glue. So for the red coals, I used this awesome stuff which is called bullseye frit, which is basically coarse coloured glass. It's perfect for the coals because when the light shines through it, you get the really nice tone variations of orange and reds in the glass. And for gluing it in place, I used super glue, spreading it all over the base and then also dabbing super glue over the top of the coals so that it seeps in and it becomes one solid piece. Okay, back to finishing off the terrain aspect of the build. Here I am carving in some marks to outline the edge of the flagstone area. I needed to carve it in because XPS foam comes with this shiny outer layer that doesn't take paint very well. To remove that, I just used a kitchen knife, and the rough cut look really doesn't matter because I'm looking for a rough cut stone look anyway. And what a surprise, the old tinfoil ball again. So you can see exactly what I'm doing here at this stage of the build, so this is a good time to drop my third and final Skyrim trivia question. And the question is, which order of monks lives on the peak of Skyrim's tallest mountain? This is also a great point to say, if you're enjoying the content that I'm making guys, please hit the big red subscribe button for me. I love every part of making these videos for you guys, and every subscription that I get really does help the channel to grow and get the content out to more viewers. So if you're a subscriber, thank you so much, I really appreciate the support. Okay, more flickering LED lights. You can see around the edges of the Skyforge in Skyrim that there are braziers with hot burning coals, so I used the exact same technique as before to place in my lights. However, these lights were going to be in a slightly more exposed area of the build, so I used some very fine sawdust and PVA glue to disguise them and make them blend into the surrounding stonework a little better. Right, moving on to the natural rock outcroppings in the build. For this I used one of my favourite crafting materials, tree bark. I just put the bark in the oven at 180 degrees and let it cook for about 40 minutes. And then it is ready to start gluing in and around the project. I collected a range of sizes and pieced them together to get as close a fit as possible to what I am seeing in the Skyrim reference images. And with this really simple step, this forge is really starting to come together as a recognisable rendition of the Skyforge. I used my knife to carve some cracks and crevices into the flagstones. You can see these in the game and they really help by adding a sense of ancient wear and tear. I then gave the whole project a base coat of black Mod Podge before moving on to some of the finer details of the project. Dioramas, the inventor of the pocket radio, once said, "Nothing works without details. They are everything, the baseline of quality." So all of these things I'm about to add really are some of the most important aspects of the build. The first of which is these awesome little resin braziers, the only detail of the project that I did not handcraft myself. I saw them on eBay and I just had to get them. Unfortunately, I could only get 4 of them, so there is one brazier missing in the project, but this is something I may fix at a later stage. I wanted the light to shine up through the braziers just like the forge, so I had a bit of a task drilling out the cores, also using my Dremel to carve around the outer detail of the brazier. This step took quite a bit of time, but it was well worth the effort as they really helped to set off the look of the build. After a black base coat, I used gunmetal paint and then the strong tone wash, both from Army Painter Paints. Mini painting is definitely not my strong suit, but once the wash was dry, they look great in the project, as you will see in a bit. I just glued these into the project over the flickering lights with hot glue and then added some of the bullseye frit and secured it all into place with super glue, just like I did with the main forge. The next small detail to add is a tiny anvil that I crafted from XPS foam. I unfortunately lost the footage of the making process, but that was effectively just gluing a few shapes together, nothing complicated. I then had a helpful tip from Carl over at Carl Makes Stuff for the painting, which was to have a black undercoat and dry brushing on gunmetal, making sure to have a heavier hand where the hammer strikes would be landing on the top of the anvil. Thanks for the tip, Carl. Next on the list was the little trough that Erland Greymane would be using to quench his blades. This was one piece of XPS foam that I gouged out using my knife. I then used a hot Allen key to melt and smooth out the recess. Next, I used my knife to carve in the brickwork and I used a pencil to widen the grooves before giving the trough a quick base coat of black paint and Mod Podge. For the stone colours I did an overbrushing of graphite grey followed by some dry brushing with neutral grey and finishing off with neutral grey mixed with titanium white for the highlights. Now I wanted to pour some resin into the trough, so I sealed it with a matte varnish on the inside so that the paint did not react with the resin. For the water effect, I used this 2-part epoxy which is extremely easy to use. Just mix together 2 equal parts of resin and hardener and stir for a couple of minutes, making sure that it's thoroughly mixed, and then pour. And off camera I got rid of any bubbles with a short blast from a heat gun. And on to the last handcrafted detail of the project, the grinding stone. You can see exactly what is going on here, but I used XPS foam for the whole thing, which once carved I glued together with PVA glue and let set overnight. I bent a short piece of wire into the shape for a lever and hey presto, you have a grinding stone. I then used my knife to carve in some wood grain texture before moving on to the paint job. For painting I used my normal approach. Black base coat with burnt umber for overbrushing, followed by a dry brushing of burnt umber that I had mixed with titanium white, which makes a light tan colour. For the stone itself, I overbrushed the same tan colour and then dry brushed some neutral grey, which I then lightened up with titanium white for the highlights. Bish bash bosh, and the job is a good one. And finally I can get on to the final paint job on the project. For this section, rather than repeating myself a lot, I'm going to bring up text on the screen describing the colours I am using and the painting technique, and while that is going on I can chat to you about something a little more interesting than the names of paint colours. Right now, more than ever before, it is so important for people to find a way to escape the mundanity and exhaustion of isolation, and for me the things that have kept me sane are all based in using the imagination. Obviously, I turned to crafting and literature like the works of J.R.R. Tolkien for relief, But when I get a chance, there is nothing I love more than gaming an evening away, getting lost in the expansive world of Skyrim. There's a whole world there waiting to be explored with endless exciting quests and side quests, and its non-linear game structure really helps you feel you're in control of the fate of your character. It is role-playing for the individual, and even though I have loved this game since its release, it is only now that I can truly say that I fully appreciate this game. When they created this world, little did Bethesda know that what they were doing was creating something that would be helping to sustain the mental health of many people during very testing times. So thank you, Bethesda, for creating this game. It has helped to keep me sane. So I know I have asked all three of my trivia questions already, but here's a question for you, again just for fun. What is the longest stretch you have ever spent in Skyrim in one sitting? For me, I think it might be somewhere in the realms of 10 to 12 hours. I'm pretty sure that there might be someone out there who can beat me on this hands down though. Okay, let's move on to the very last detail of my build. One thing I have been wanting to do for a while now in my builds is to include miniatures. So I used Hero Forge to make an approximation of a miniature for Ireland Greymane to put into the project. I tried to find an actual Skyrim mini of Ireland but couldn't find it anywhere. So if you know where I could get such a thing, please let me know in the comments below. Thing is though, Hero Forge is really easy to use and you can build a character that is definitely close enough to sit nicely in the build. But then I looked at the cost and the delivery time, and there was no way on earth I was ever going to get this mini in time for the project. Cue my knight in shining armour, the man, the myth, the legend that is Colin Bressie, aka Crazy Crafter. When he heard my predicament, he said, "Send me that dang STL, I'll print it off for you and I'll have it to you in days." Not all heroes wear capes.
And then the Forge produced the Skyforge minis themselves. Whoa! Whoa! From this to this. Right now they look like bats. They're hanging upside down. Pretty cool detail. They print up quite nice. Get a lot of detail. Woohoo!
And here's that very miniature that has travelled 5,000 miles from California just to be in this video, and as it happens, my very first miniature paint job. I may release the footage of the paint job at some point, but this video is already long enough, so let's see how it sits within the project. Guys, just while we are looking at these first shots, I just want to give a massive shout out and thanks to my patrons who are on the screen right now. You guys are the wind beneath my wings. I honestly couldn't do this channel without your continued support. And to anyone watching who is enjoying my videos and would like to support the channel, please have a look at my Patreon page to see the benefits I offer for my members who support the channel. Your support would be most welcome. Okay, let's take some glamour shots in the garden. So there we go, guys, that is my take on the Skyforge from Skyrim, and I'm over the moon with the result. I just love it. I can't wait to put this into a D&D game, and I'm even really happy with the little miniature that I painted of Ireland Greymane. And on this, I just want to say a massive thank you to Colin Bressie over at Crazy Crafter channel. He sent this all the way from California. He printed it off for me just because he knew that I was building the Skyforge. What an utter legend, guys. Please go and like his channel, Crazy Crafter channel. There's a link in the description below this video. And also on people who are supporting the community, I just need to say a big massive thanks to Luke Fellows over at Geek Gaming Scenics as well. In his video this week he mentioned my channel and some other really cool channels, and off the back of that I've gained quite a few subscribers. Maybe you're one of those subscribers. So if you haven't seen that video, there's a link in the description below, so go and check out that video and you won't be disappointed. There's some great content to pick up there. Guys, please give this video a like and give me a comment below to tell me what you think I might be able to do to improve this build. And also maybe you could tell me the other locations in Skyrim that you like, that you think that might make a really cool miniature build, because I'd love to go and take a look. And also the last little thing that I want to mention is my Discord. Discord is open to you guys if you want to come over, and if you're a crafter and you want to show off your work or just generally get involved in some craft related chat. It's a really nice community, and yeah, you'd be welcome to come over and say hello. There's also a link in the description for that below this video. And that is it, guys. I will see you next week for another crafty video. So all the best, guys. I hope you have a great weekend and see you next time. Bye. Join Colin Bressy, Daniel West and myself every Sunday at 10 AM PST, that's 6 PM UK time, on the Crazy Crafter livestream featuring awesome guests every week from the crafting community. Link in the description below this video.